What's up, everybody? My name is Julie, and today I am here to tell you everything you need to know to prepare for and pass the CSCS exam in just 10 weeks. So to tell you guys a little bit about myself, I'm a second-year physical therapy student at the University of Scranton. I have a bachelor's degree in exercise science, and throughout my undergrad, I also played field hockey at the collegiate level. And I do have experience training in both sports performance and strength and conditioning as an intern and as a paid trainer. And the reason why I mention all of these things is because they all definitely contributed to my success on the exam. So if you can relate to any one of those things about me that I mentioned, definitely watch this video, listen to my 5 top tips that I have, and I really think it'll help you out preparing for this test. All right, so I took the exam just a little over a month ago from when I'm recording this. So the first part of the exam is the scientific foundations, primarily consisting of exercise science. My biggest takeaway from this section is to not underestimate sports psychology. But the sports psychology section is brand new. It was added in 2020, and I wasn't able to find a lot of resources out there for tackling that section. That being said, I'm very happy with how I did on it. My scores definitely reflect the hard work I put in. However, it was a lot harder than I anticipated, so make sure you thoroughly read that chapter in the book and look for some other resources on that. Both sections of the exam have an extra 15 questions on them that are unscored. You don't know which ones are scored and which ones aren't, but in the 2.5-hour time frame that you get for the practical application section, you're answering 125 questions, and for the scientific foundations, you're answering 95 questions in 90 minutes. You do not get a calculator on the exam. So for that exercise science section, make sure that you know how to do all of the formulas and calculations with a pen and paper, because that's how you do it on the exam. Biggest takeaway here is that exercise technique and program design are 100% the most difficult sections on this part of the test. Even if you're somebody who has worked out forever and you feel like you know exercise technique really well, you probably don't, only because this test goes over so many different training modalities, things like running and strongman and Olympic lifting. It's not just your basic, bicep curls and back squats. So my first day of studying was on the 25th. And then just to go over the highlights here, it took me about 6 weeks to read the book. I'm going to get into that a little bit more when I get into my top 5 tips. But I want you guys to notice that I pretty much did something every day. There are some days that I took off that you'll notice blank spaces. But one of my biggest tips is to definitely be consistent. I'll talk about, what my reading and note-taking consisted of in a little bit. But it took me 6 weeks to finish. So then getting into July, I finally finished the textbook. And at that point, I had just under 4 weeks to review for my tests. So those 4 weeks consisted of purchasing some outside resources, going through practice questions, finding my weak points and really zoning in on them. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the resources that I purchased later on in this video. But just to show you guys, just about 10 weeks, a little bit less it took me to get the certification. On July 30th, I finally passed my exam and became a CSCS. All right, guys, so now I'm going to go through and just give you my top 5 tips for passing this exam. Tip number 1 is to read the entire textbook and take notes. This is super important. This is something that a lot of people try to cheap shot when they're going through their studying for the exam. I did bring my book to show you guys. You need to get the 4th edition of the Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning textbook. This is what the exam is based upon. Don't get an older edition because they do update the material. So you're going to want to get this book and read it cover to cover. Pay special attention to the graphs and tables and the blue boxes. You'll notice when you go through the textbook, they kind of highlight and bring together really important points from the chapter. Those are something you really want to focus in on. All right, so I also brought for you guys my notebook just to show you it doesn't need to be fancy. All right, I use just your typical spiral notebook, a pack of colored pens, and as I read through the textbook, I had my highlighter. I would highlight important stuff in the book, And I also would take notes. So here's an example of some notes that I took, different colors, drawing out the charts and the tables that were on the test. I can't stress this enough, how important it is that you actually go through everything. Even as an exercise science major, the first 10 chapters were all things that I've learned before in some capacity, but I didn't know until I was reading through the textbook how much I really needed to brush up on those concepts. All right, guys, so tip number 2 for you is to constantly be reassessing your knowledge. All right, and what I mean by that is as you're going through this textbook is thick. There is so much information in this book, and if you're just reading and reading and reading, you're going to have trouble grasping at the end of the textbook what you know and what you need to go through again. So what I recommend doing is going through little by little while you're reading the textbook and kind of assessing what you know and what you don't know. Right? So what I would do is I would read typically 3 chapters at a time. And then at the end of going through those chapters and taking notes while I was doing it, I would stop reading, take my nose out of the book, and kind of bring together everything that I just learned and make some study questions. So personally, I made fill in the blank questions. I just thought that it was a good way to kind of go through the material. So I would come up with all these questions for what I thought was relevant. And then I came up with some answers to the questions. All right, I did this for each chapter. So making the questions, the act of actually going through and making them was a great way for me to just have that information in my brain and see how well I knew it. But more importantly, I had all of these questions at the end that I was able to go through when I finished the textbook and kind of see, all right, chapters 1 to 3, super strong. I still remember that stuff well, but all right, chapter 10, wow, I got a lot of those wrong. It's time to go through that again. So at some capacity, in some way, make sure that you are reassessing your knowledge as you are reading this textbook. All right, tip number 3 for you guys is to take advantage of free resources. One thing that this process taught me is that there is so much free information out there to help you for preparing for this exam. Honestly, probably the most crucial to my success was joining Facebook groups that were dedicated to helping people that were studying for this exam. So one of them is called the Strength and Conditioning Study Group. It's run by a fellow PT student. His name is Matt Casturo. Definitely search this group on Facebook. He'll let you in. And there's a lot of awesome information that he puts out. I found that really helpful going through and studying for this test. So the other Facebook group that you've definitely got to join is the official NSCA CSCS exam prep group. And this group is literally run by the NSCA. The people who create the test that you are about to take also created this study group to help you. The most important resource in this is the woman who actually runs the group. Her name is Catherine. She is a lifesaver. She will answer any questions that you have pertaining to this exam. By far the most helpful resource that I used for this preparation was this Facebook group, and it was free. So definitely join it. Answer all the questions that she has on here. You might have noticed in my study calendar that I had like Facebook questions. Catherine takes time out of her day to create difficult questions, test-like questions, and post them in this group for you to do for free. Go through this group, search some questions, answer them, ask questions, and you'll be set. The other free resource that I definitely would recommend looking at is YouTube. Again, be careful of who you're looking at. Anytime you're looking at free stuff, find trustworthy people, but I definitely got a lot out of searching on YouTube for some of the more difficult concepts, things like phases of sprinting, coaching different agility movements, even some of the Olympic lifts and Olympic progressions. Those aren't things that I've had a lot of experience with in the past. So I went through these Facebook groups, found out who people recommended learning from, got in front of my computer and just learned, watched some videos. All right, tip number 4 today is going to be to invest in your success. I know I just talked about the free stuff and that's all great, but if you want to do really well on this exam, if you want to, not only pass, but really prove to yourself that you have what it takes to be a strength and conditioning coach, you got to put a little bit of money into it. That's at least my opinion. And then once I finished the book, the first thing I did was purchase this NSCA study bundle. The bundle consists of 200 practice questions, and most importantly, video practice questions. One thing that kind of blindsides people on this exam is that there's videos of athletes performing movements that you need to know how to correct or cue or say that it's good form, or give some sort of other explanation about. So this study bundle is the only place that you're going to find videos of that nature. And on top of that, this study bundle definitely has the most difficult questions that I came across. And that's what you want. This test is not easy. So it is definitely worth investing in because you get test-like questions, and it also comes with a study guide. So just about a week later, I purchased practice questions from Matt Casturo. So he's the one that runs that Facebook group that I just showed you guys. And his practice exam was great. It came with explanations for why each answer was the answer. However, I will say that his questions did not match the difficulty of the questions on the exam. And that's no fault of his or anybody's. He doesn't make the exam, right? So just know that when you're buying practice questions from external resources, they're not necessarily going to match the difficulty level, but it was just another great way to kind of see where my weaknesses were at, what topics I needed to brush up on. And it's 100 questions is a pretty good amount. So that's something that I went through all at once to kind of build up my focus endurance a bit, I'll call it. Because this test's 4 hours, guys. You gotta definitely train your brain to focus for a long amount of time. All right. And then the last thing that I purchased was actually the NSCA Exam Prep Live Clinic. I only really felt that I needed it for the practical application, so I didn't do the exercise science day. And I will say this was super helpful. They gave a lot of good information. They pretty much break down the test into PowerPoint slides and teach it to you as if it's a class. So if you're thinking about doing this, do not take one of these clinics until you've at least finished the textbook. All right. I definitely think it was worth doing. However, I don't think it was paramount to me passing or doing as well as I did on the exam. But the one thing that I'll say about it is it did give me a ton of confidence. Definitely don't be afraid to invest in these resources, and it's going to be worth it when you pass the test. All right, guys, my final tip for you all, tip number 5, is to get practical experience. One of the first things you're going to see when you sit down and start researching this exam is that they recommend basing your study timeline off of whether or not you have practical experience. It is super, super important to passing this exam. Now, I am, pretty young. I'm a student. I don't have a ton of experience, but I did make sure that before I was ready to take this exam, I did have some coaching experience. I've watched athletes move and perform exercises, and I do think that's super important. The reason why is not only are there videos on this test that you need to be able to, critique athletes and give them proper cueing on how to fix things that they're doing improperly, but even when you're reading through the textbook, if you don't have any real world experience working with these variables or talking to people about them, it's going to be really, really hard for them to stick. Some of you guys might be like visual learners. If you have some experience working with people and you can actually visualize some of these concepts being put into play, it's going to make things so much easier to learn. On top of that, if you're a PT student like myself, I did work as a PT aide for multiple years, and even little things like that, like just watching people move is really going to help you on this test. So if you don't have practical experience, try your best to go out and get some. Hopefully, if you're watching this video, COVID is not as much of a threat as it once was, and it's a little easier to kind of knock on somebody's door and say, hey, can I come in here? But definitely make sure that you get some of that before you take this exam, because you'll be setting yourself up for that much more success. So thanks for watching this video. I really hope that you find it helpful and can take some tips away from this. Please like this video if you found it helpful. Share it with your friends who are also going to be studying for this test. And most importantly, don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. There's so many people out there that want to see more CSCSs out there. Please reach out to me if you have any specific questions. I am putting some links in the info for this video on how you can get in touch with me. Feel free to reach out over Instagram. And just stick to it. Be consistent. Make a plan for yourself. Set aside 8 to 10 weeks and, get after it. I'm super excited to help people out and to see more CSCSs out there. And good luck studying.